Hi, this is Karen from the Huntley Library, and this is day 3 of 12 days of crafting, and today we're going to be making a basic fudge. To get started, you're going to want to gather these ingredients. You're going to need 2 cups of granulated sugar, that's the white sugar, a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder, 1 cup of whole milk, 2 tablespoons of butter, plus a little bit extra for greasing the pan or dish that your fudge is going to set up in, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So get those things together and we will start assembling. Our fudge is going to cook on the stove for a little while, so you're going to want to choose a pot to start out with that's got kind of a heavier bottom so that the heat will hold in there nicely and heat evenly, because you don't want this to scorch and burn and stick to the pot. So in here right now I've got my 2 cups of granulated sugar and my 1/4 cup of the cocoa powder. This is the kind that I'm using. Hershey's makes a nice one too. So whatever you happen to have around your house, you can use a 1/4 cup of that. And then we also need the salt, and that was a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So here's my 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And we are going to take a whisk and mix that up together. So that is our step 1. Whisk together sugar, cocoa, and salt in our saucepan. We'll add the milk after that's blended. So here's my whisk, and I'm just gonna mix this up together until it's mostly combined. It's a little dusty here. This is the first time I'm making this recipe. I have made fudge before, but it hasn't been like this. I think I used marshmallow fluff before when I made fudge. My grandmother used to make it all the time, but we never paid enough attention to what she was doing, nor did she write down her recipes. She was always the sort of cook who would just add a little bit of this and a little bit of that until it feels right. So figuring out what she did is difficult for us. Okay, so we're ready. This is all blended together. We're going to add our cup of milk to that mixture and then whisk that together. So you might have a few lumps after you combine the wet ingredients with the dry ingredients, and that's okay, because once it starts spoiling and you get it on the stove, it will smooth out nicely. At least that's what they tell me in the recipe. We'll see if that actually happens in real life. Okay, and at this point I am going to transfer this pot over to the stove for it to start heating up. Step 2, bring the mixture to a boil over a medium to low flame or heat, stirring occasionally. You want to keep the heat as low as possible to avoid the scorching, which I mentioned before. So I've transferred my pot over to the stove and I've got it on a medium-low flame. I have a gas stove, so yours might be different if you use an electric stove. And I am going to stir it occasionally just to keep it from burning, and I will show you what that looks like. Here we are at the stove, and I have just turned on the heat, and this is my fudge mixture right here, and I've got my whisk in here still. I'm going to switch to a spoon in a little while, but for right now I'm letting it warm up gradually and just stirring occasionally. If you have a spoon rest, I have a bunny-shaped spoon rest on your stove. You can put your whisk or your spoon on that if you don't want to keep it on the pot. Because if it's metal, all metal like this, it can heat up the handle too. So we'll let that cook for a while. We want to bring this to a boil, and once it's boiling, you're going to wait about 10 minutes and then start checking it for doneness. So we'll let this get cooking and meet back in about 10 minutes. While we're waiting for our fudge to heat up and cook, I'm going to get some other things ready. So our step 3 is, while your fudge is cooking, prepare your pan, your ice water, and a water bath. So the first thing we're going to do is grease a pan with some of that extra butter that we put aside, and then we're going to fill a glass with ice and water and place that near the stove. That's for a test we're going to do to make sure that the fudge is done. And then the last thing we're going to do is to fill the sink with a few inches of cold water, and that's just a cold water bath to help our fudge set. So I've got some spreadable butter here that I'm going to use to grease my pan for the fudge. And I am using an 8 by 8 inch metal pan, and I would think something about this size would be fine. If you have something else, a glass pan like a Pyrex dish would work just fine. The recipe actually calls for a round Pyrex pan. I like my fudge to be square, and I don't have a round Pyrex pan, so we're going to use this. Whatever you happen to have on hand that's about the same size, just make sure you grease it. And if you don't like to get butter on your fingers, you can protect your fingers with a little plastic bag, or a piece of plastic wrap will work too. Now our fudge is not going to fill this all the way to the top, so if you don't want to grease all the way to the top on the sides, you don't have to. Since this is my first time trying it out, I'm going to go about halfway up, just so I got my bases covered, or my pan covered. You can also probably double or triple this recipe too if you wanted to make more fudge at a time. I'm just going to see how this one batch works first. So you can see my fudge has come to a boil here. It's boiling quite vigorously. So I started my timer for 10 minutes, and when it expires, I'm going to check it and see how done my fudge is at that point. But meanwhile, I'm going to keep stirring it a little bit more regularly than I was doing, just so it doesn't burn or stick. While I'm waiting for the fudge to boil, I'm also, or fudge to cook all the way through, I also prepared this glass of ice water to do our soft ball test to make sure that the fudge is done. So that's what we're going to be doing next. So we're almost ready to test for doneness. I've got about a minute left on the clock for my fudge before I do this. So after the 10 minutes of boiling, we're going to do our doneness test. If you have a candy thermometer, your fudge is going to be ready when your thermometer registers 235 degrees Fahrenheit. I do not have a candy thermometer, so this is going to be a fun test for me. I'm going to be doing a soft ball test, which is where I'm going to take a little bit of the fudge from the pot, and I'm going to drizzle it into my glass of water right here, my glass of ice water, and then if it forms a soft ball, then the fudge is done. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, we're ready to do the soft ball test. My fudge has actually changed consistency a little bit. It's not smooth like it was before. It's very bubbly, and some of the bubbles are really big and some are really small. So I'm gonna hope that this is the right consistency for what it's supposed to look like. So here we go. I'm drizzling a little bit of fudge in there. I'm not sure what it's doing in the bottom of the glass here. It looks like it just sat on the bottom of the glass and it did not form a ball. So I don't know what to make of that. But it does get, like, as soon as it hit the side of the glass where it was really cold, it did get very syrupy, I guess. So I'm going to let it go a little bit longer and try one more time and see if I can get it to do the soft ball. And if I can't, then we'll just wing it from there. Okay, we're trying the test again. I'm just going to drizzle it right on the top here. Hopefully it won't slip all the way down to the bottom like it did before. And then, yep, it looks like I'm forming a nice little soft ball here. So it's ready for our next step. And here is step 5. When your fudge is done, we're going to turn off the heat and stir in the vanilla and the 2 tablespoons of butter. We're going to place the whole pan, once we've done that, into the sink and keep stirring with a wooden spoon this time until it's cool but still liquid. And then at that point, if you have other ingredients that you want to add to your fudge, mine is going to be a basic, very plain fudge, but if you have nuts or something else that you want to add, that is when you would add them, right before we are going to pour it into its setup pan. So let's add our vanilla and butter, and then we'll move over to the sink. Okay, I moved our fudge off of the heat, and I put it on this towel so I can protect my counter at the same time. If you have hot fudge, you could leave it on the stove to do this part, or if you're doing something like I'm doing, make sure you protect the surface that you're moving it to so that you don't scorch that either. And here's my 2 tablespoons of butter, which I'm going to stir in. Let that get a little melty. And then we also have to add a couple of teaspoons of this vanilla extract. So here we go. 1, 2. And we'll just stir that in. Almost there. Melt, butter, melt. Okay, so I'm going to give it about another minute to melt, and then we're headed over to the sink. Okay, here is our fudge in the sink, and be careful so that your fudge doesn't take a dive into the water and you don't get water that's in the bottom of the sink into your pot and into your fudge, because that will not help it set up at all. I'm going to actually need both hands to hold this here, otherwise it's going to float away from me. I might have a little bit too much water in my sink here, but the idea behind this is that you want it to cool off slowly, yet remain liquid enough for you to pour into its pan where it's going to set up and chill out. So once this is cool, I'm going to pour it into its greased pan. And like I said, if you have other ingredients that you're going to want to add to it, at that point when you're ready to pour it into the other pan, that's when you want to add them here to this pan, and then you'll stir them in and then pour them into that other pan. Okay. As you can see, I've removed my fudge from the sink. It is now a pretty stiff, syrupy mixture, and I think that it's cool enough and yet still pliable enough for me to pour it into my greased pan where it will rest until it is set up. So I'm going to move this over a little bit, and then here's my greased pan, and we are going to pour this in here. Come on, fudge. Kind of looks like cake batter consistency now. And if this doesn't all come out with your spoon, you can use a spatula to encourage it out of the pot here. I may have to do that. My wooden spoon is not up to the task. So let me switch implements here. get a spatula. Here's a spatula. As a kid, I did not really like nuts at all, so when my grandma added nuts to her fudge, I was not super thrilled about that. So we got to start making requests before she'd make her holiday fudge, and I always wanted plain fudge. My grandmother's was kind of interesting because she let hers crystallize a little bit, so it was very dry and it kind of fell apart in your mouth, which I kind of liked. But a lot of fudges that I've had since then, like the goal is to have them as creamy as possible. So it's kind of like eating chunks of sliced frosting, I guess, most other people's fudges, but I liked my grandmother's sort of hard, crumbly crystallized fudge, so maybe that makes me a bad fudge connoisseur, but I'm kind of hoping that this is how mine will turn out. Otherwise, I'll have to go back to the drawing board for Grandma's recipe, but this one might be fine for sharing with other people who have higher fudge expectations, or at least different ones from mine. Okay, I think that's as much as I'm going to be able to scrape out of there. I have quite a bit of fudge still left in this container. If you are one of those kinds of people who likes to lick your bowls clean, that might be a fun thing for you or a family member or someone who's happens to be hanging around your kitchen right now to do. It can help you clean up by getting some of the fudge out of your pot. There'll be less dishes for you to do. So this is going to take about half an hour of just sitting here out in the room temperature air for it to dry and set up. Set up, I guess, is the proper term. It's going to harden a little bit, and then you'll be able to slice it and try it and package it up if you're sharing it and you're taking it somewhere else. Okay, that's it. So in about half an hour, we'll be able to test this and see what it turns out like. I just sort of went through this without showing you the step, but if you would like a written reminder, we poured the fudge into the grease pan. It was liquid enough for it to still spread out all on its own, and now we're just going to let it cool and harden for about half an hour at room temperature. Step 7, here's a preview. We're going to eat it. So our fudge today was inspired by this recipe that I found at www.thekitchen-e.com for their classic chocolate fudge, discovered by way of Pinterest. Thank you. I don't know how your fudge turned out, but mine is like the consistency of taffy. So this is like hot fudge for a hot fudge sundae. Maybe, except mine is now cold fudge and it's super pliable. You could mold this into anything. So maybe this is sculpting fudge. I don't know. Different consistency from any other fudge that I've tried before, except for, the kind that goes on ice cream. So I think that is the future for my fudge. It's going to go live on some ice cream, which is great because I've been looking for corn syrup free hot fudge toppings for ice cream. So does it taste good is the next question, and that remains to be seen. Thanks for joining me to make fudge this afternoon. Mine is literally melting in my hand right now and really would be better with ice cream. I'm going to try it anyway. It is delightfully chocolatey. Again, better with ice cream. Totally enclosing my fingers in itself right now. So yeah, I hope yours turned out a little bit more solid than mine did. If you have any recipes for fudge that you'd like me to sample that might turn out better than this one, I'd be happy to try them. I'm still looking for that crumbly dry fudge, not melt in your hand fudge, that my grandma used to make. So thanks for joining me again for 12 days of crafting, and I hope you'll check out our other craft videos and our website, www.huntleylibrary.org. Thanks. Bye.